Hurricane warnings in effect for the South Carolina coast and a small portion of the North Carolina coast as Ian doesn't want to go away. It's off the Florida coast and moving to the northeast, and it is a hurricane once again. But there are a couple of things that are different about it. We're going to talk about that. We're going to examine what looks to be a really complex forecast overall for the eastern part of the United States for a whole host of reasons, lasting into the first part of next week. And if we have some time, maybe we'll even look at the overall long-term pattern. And that's all coming up on tonight's Joe and Joe Weather Show, brought to you by Omni True Value Hardware at 1226 North Wellwood Avenue in West Babylon in southwest Suffolk County on Long Island, serving the entire New York, New Jersey, Connecticut tri-state area. This is probably a wise time to make sure that you've got everything you need to make sure that you are protected and that your home is protected in case there is some adverse weather. And that includes tropical storms and hurricanes. And don't forget, come wintertime, the largest supplier of rock salt. 631-756-1125, the phone number. The website is...
Oh, it's me. OmniTrueValue.com. The last 2 nights you've been doing it, Joe.
Yeah, I think I know. I don't want to take that away from you, Joe.
Yeah. Well, it turned out to be a day today where we had on the cable news networks, wall-to-wall destruction, and
Yes.
everywhere you look. And
good way to put it.
And unfortunately, the destruction is going to continue probably into tomorrow, because next on Ian's hit list appears to be the area around Charleston, South Carolina, not as a Category 4, but more like a Category 1 with potential for maybe 80-mile-per-hour sustained winds on landfall sometime around 1 or 2 o'clock tomorrow afternoon, if predictions hold.
I want to see what there's a reconnaissance aircraft on the way there, so I want to see what it finds, because I'm on the same page with you as from yesterday. By the way, right after the show, I called up the Hurricane Center, and I let them know that Joe Rayo said that it is not moving 020, it is moving 030. And Joe, sure enough, on the 11 o'clock advisory, 030 was the movement. So, you know, they do watch this show, just so you know.
Well,
I'm kidding, of course. They're doing a wonderful job. The Hurricane Center's got their hands full. Their job is to save lives, front and center, and that's what they're trying to do. But that 030 motion, though, is a big deal because we talked about this last night. The further northeast it goes in that direction, the further offshore it gets, the higher the probability that we could see this strengthen. That's why I want to wait for the recon. Maybe we'll have some reports, the pressure reports back while we're on the air tonight, because I was thinking my initial thoughts were Category 1 and maybe even as strong as a low-grade Category 2. So we'll see if the recon can let me keep that prediction. By the way, when you look at it on the satellite, and for those of you who read the discussions from the Hurricane Center, they've mentioned how this has sort of a hybrid look to it, and indeed it does. For one thing, there is very little going on south of the center. It's all north of the center, and it's got that common structure that frontal systems have to an extent. On the other hand, it's clearly a warm core system. So that's why it's still being classified as a hurricane and not being designated as something less or post-tropical. But nonetheless, it's still going to be a problem for the South Carolina coast. This is not going to become a Category 5 hurricane. It's not going to become a 4. It's not going to become a 3. It doesn't have the time because this time tomorrow, it will probably have been already moved inland. And I'm thinking somewhere between Charleston and Myrtle Beach. It's been wanting to go further east, so I'm going to nudge the landfall area a little bit further east as well.
And I'm looking at the long wave infrared, which I will now share on the screen here. And I agree with you, Joe. There's not much to be said for the storm to the south of the eye. The area of orange, for example, is indicative more of a dry airflow all of the activity is occurring to the north, and you can see there's where some of the cold cloud tops are north of the eye. It's a little difficult to, unlike last night where the eye was very plain and very sharp and very easily defined. I guess right now the best place that we could say where the eye is based upon this satellite view is somewhere right about here. And again, to the north is where you're seeing the areas or shades of blue and the darkening shades indicating convection and colder cloud tops, but not much is happening to the south of the storm. So that it shows you the change in character and the change in the picture, the viewpoint of the storm since when we were here 24 hours ago.
Yeah, and again, this is another reason why I want to wait to see what the recon has, because that's going to make, in terms of where my head is at with this. Now, I want to just hold up for 1 second and let me just bring up to the chat board a big hello to everybody that's watched here for the Joe and Joe Weather Show tonight. Welcome to any of you who are new. Appreciate it. You could subscribe to my YouTube channel by hitting the subscribe button. So this way, every time Joe and I are on, you get notified. And we're on Monday through Thursday at 7:30 and Sundays at 11 a.m. But sometimes we adjust the schedules because of storms. And we're going to do exactly that. So let me just let everybody know. Tomorrow, we will not be on at 7:30. We will be on at 12 noon, so that we will be on around or just before Ian makes landfall in South Carolina. So a 12 noon show. So that's where you go to your boss and you say, look, okay, I need you to adjust my schedule because at 12 noon, I have to watch the Joe and Joe Weather Show. And I'm sure, if you're a doctor and you've got a surgery scheduled, you could just tell the patient, look, we're pushing it back a cut hour or two because 12 noon, not good for me. I have the Joe and Joe Weather Show. So we're going to do that. And unless the world comes to an end, which apparently these days there's an apocalypse every day, but let's assume that the world is not going to come to an end this weekend. Joe and I will take the weekend off, and we will be back on Monday at 7:30, unless something happens where Ian decides to move up the East Coast, or something radical happens from what we're looking at right now. Oh, and last thing, the like button, folks. We love getting to 100 likes. So if you like the Joe and Joe Weather Show, go ahead and hit that like button. And Joe and I really do appreciate it, but only if you like the show. So, Rayo on radar.
And what we're looking at right now, Joe, is the Jacksonville radar. Very interesting. You can see that the storm, for the most part, Ian is out to sea, but the outermost bands, west bands, if you will, is skimming the coastline from Central Florida, East Central Florida, up the coast, all the way through coastal Georgia. So if you're right along the coast, you're getting rain or shower activity from Ian, but you don't have to go too far inland to get away from all of that. And as you can see, most of the Florida Peninsula as of this hour appears to be dry. But could they use any more than what they've had over the last 24 hours? I mean, some places in north central Florida picked up on average 18 to 24 inches of rain. So they don't need any more of that stuff. But again, right along the coastline of Georgia, down through northern and central coastal Florida, there are some showers, again, generated by the offshore antics of what is now a hurricane again, Hurricane Ian.
Yep. And the rain area here actually on the radar has grown a bit with this in the last couple of hours. Why don't we move up the coast and see what's happening? Let's check out, Joe, why don't we try the Charleston, South Carolina radar? I was able to get it earlier, and then I was having some problems at one point. So let's see if it's back. That's CLX.
This is, well, CHS, Charleston, South Carolina is here. This is not the Charleston radar. This is CLX. I'm not quite sure.
It's the Clorox radar.
The Clorox radar. Yeah.
Actually, it says Charleston on the identifier up there. So I don't know what. Well, go ahead.
Really?
You got it.
Well, I mean, as we were just pointing out, it looks like that the rain is working its way back to the west. And if you're in Charleston, CHS, or maybe if you are in CLX, well, CLX right now doesn't have very much of anything, but the activity, as you can see plainly, is moving in from the ocean and getting ready to spread across South Carolina. Now, according to the National Hurricane Center, this area that I'm outlining right now, this whole area here is under the gun for the potential of anywhere from 6 to 10 inches of rain over mostly the next 24 hours due to the landfall of Ian, very close to the city of Charleston, South Carolina, again early tomorrow afternoon. In fact, as Joe said, we'll be on at noontime, and right about that time, we'll be watching as Ian gets ready to move in from the ocean, and this will be its last time that it will get its feet wet, because once it moves inland, it pretty much is going to be downgraded quickly from hurricane to tropical storm to depression to just remnant low probably by Saturday and Sunday. And some of that remnant is going to affect us here in the New York City tri-state area. There is now a very distinct possibility that we're going to be seeing, unfortunately, rain on your Saturday, folks. And it looks like it's going to be from Saturday into Saturday evening. And there'll also be a very sharp cutoff from significant rain to just a little rain. In fact, New York City probably looks like it's going to pick up maybe as much as an inch or two. Down the Jersey coast, they could pick up anywhere from 2 to 4 inches out of this. And meantime, north of New York City into the Hudson Valley, probably less than an inch, maybe a half or a quarter of an inch in most areas in the lower Hudson Valley. But nonetheless, even up here in the New York area, we likely are going to be getting basted by the, again, remnant effects of Ian.
Yeah, as long as we don't get the core goes northwest into the Appalachians, and that's unfortunate for that area because that's going to probably bring a batch of heavy rain into northwestern South Carolina, but probably more so in western North Carolina, even Southwest Virginia. Kind of hard to say for sure how that's going to play, but when you set the next radar up. I'm going to just take the screen back for a moment here so I can make my point, and put this on a wide satellite view to show everybody what's happening here along the East Coast, because it goes back to this sort of hybrid setup that we have. Because not only do we have Ian, but we have these upper features that are now that Ian is out of the tropics, where it's basically just steering currents that move it along, and weak troughs and ridges and so on. Now we've got upper lows getting involved. If you look at the structure here on the satellite, you've got this long stretch of moisture. Ian is at the base of it, at the southern part of it, at the base, off the Florida coast. You see the turning. I mean, there's obviously a circulation there. And then those clouds extend up the coast, across, off the coast of southern New England, off the coast of Nova Scotia, streaming southwest to northeast. Now, what's going to happen is, as Ian moves inland, all of this moisture, now some of it is tropical moisture generated from Ian. Some of it is just based on what's left of an old frontal boundary that's dying out. But all of this is going to try to arc its way back northwestward as we move through the day tomorrow. So as Ian moves northwestward, which is from where it is now, it's going to move northeast, north, and then go northwest at some point. You're going to wind up. Oh, there it goes. Lost my little cursor there. You're going to wind up taking the core up this way. Where's that arrow? There's the one. That's what I was looking for. You're going to wind up taking this northwestward toward the western part of the Carolinas. But as a result, this whole thing's just going to kind of pivot around to the northwest. And as Joe pointed out, and you can see even here on this satellite, there's a sharp cutoff between where you have the overcast and where you just have some scattered clouds. And I think that's what you're going to see with respect to the rain. You're going to have this wall where you're going to go from nothing to a quarter of an inch to 3/4 of an inch to an inch plus. probably over a handful of miles. And I think that northern fringe, Joe, is probably going to set up maybe, let's say, draw a line from Scranton to perhaps where Route 84 is. I don't know. And from there into Connecticut, uh, Hartford. So let's go Scranton, Poughkeepsie, Hartford, maybe the northernmost extent of precip. And then you want to draw the 1 inch line when it's all said and done, maybe central going across Long Island, let's cut it in half. New York City, Philadelphia, north and west of Baltimore, north and west of Washington D.C., something along those lines. That's kind of how I'm seeing it.
Well, right now, if we go back to my screen, Joe, I have on the screen the WPC, the World Weather Prediction Center's forecast, rainfall forecast. It's a little bit deceptive, and here's why. Unlike when we normally show the QPF maps from a Weather Prediction Center, what this particular map is showing is in increments of 1 to 2, 2 to 4, 4 to 6, 6 to 10. Now, for example, it looks like now there's a big series coming up in Atlanta starting tomorrow between the Mets and the Braves, a 3-game series which will probably determine who eventually wins the Eastern Division crown in the National League East. And there's been talk in recent days, there's going to be a big problem with the weather. There's going to be lots of rain. Maybe they're going to have to move the game to a neutral site, a ballpark that is not in use this weekend and won't have any problems from rain. Or maybe one of the games will be rained out and they'll have to have a doubleheader on one of the 3 days, Friday, Saturday, or Sunday. That's not going to happen. As you can see here on this map, Atlanta, and this map runs from 2 o'clock this afternoon, Thursday, to 8 o'clock Sunday evening. Well, it looks like Atlanta is going to be free of any rain, right? Well, not necessarily. Tomorrow night, even though they're not, remember this lighter shade of green is 1 to 2 inches, potential 1 to 2 inches of rain. Atlanta, even though it doesn't have any precip over it, it probably is going to be receiving a little bit of precip tomorrow night in the form of some spotty light showers or maybe just a few sprinkles. Saturday and Sunday should be dry. So take the possibility of a doubleheader or moving the games to a different site off the table. That is not going to happen. And the worst of the 3 days probably will be tomorrow night. Again, this is where Ian will be making landfall, probably somewhere near Charleston. This shade of orange here, if you look at the legend, 6 to 10 inches of rain. That's where the heavy-duty stuff is going to be falling tomorrow in and around the coastline of South Carolina. Atlanta looks like it's going to be just on the fringe of getting a little bit, an itsy-bitsy piece or a teeny-weeny piece of the precipitation, less than an inch certainly, and again, more like light sprinkles or maybe some spotty rain tomorrow night. If they get that at all, Saturday and Sunday should be dry. And it looks like, Joe, if you follow this map, the 1 to 2 inch zone reaches all the way up as far, and I'm going to make this a little bit larger so that everybody can see this a little bit better, and I'll zoom in a bit. You could see that New York City is right on the edge of the 1 to 2 inch zone. And as I mentioned before, 1 to 2 inches for New York and maybe for much of Long Island and further south. And somebody on the chat board said that I'm going to piss off all the people along the Jersey Shore. Yeah. Who was it who said that? Well, it doesn't really matter. Anyway, you can see that the Jersey Shore for probably Saturday in the darker shade of green will be in the 2 to 4 inch zone. And right down by Cape May, extreme southern New Jersey, and down across parts of the Delmarva, they may see as much as 4 to 6 inches, again, all from the remnants of Ian. So unfortunately, we are going to have to deal with the Ian's remnants over the course of this weekend. It's not going to be anything close to what they've gone through in Florida or even what they're about to go through tomorrow in the Carolinas. But still, it looks like it's going to be a bit on the soggy side on Saturday, and hopefully that'll lift out and will dry out a bit for Sunday and early next week.
Joe, what's the valid time on that map? What's the time period ending?
The valid time is 8 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. So this is an update.
No.
I
But
guess
what does it go from 8 p.m. tonight until Saturday?
until 8 p.m. until 8 p.m. Sunday.
Okay, just wanted to double check on that. And in fact, now my other question is, what do you define as itsy bitsy rain in terms of an amount versus teeny weeny?
Okay, the itsy bitsy rain is when you have those little dots of precip on your windshield, and you have to put the windshield wiper on intermittent, as opposed to teeny weeny, which is when you have dots on your windshield, but you look at it and you say, what the hell, I ain't going to deal with this, and I won't even start the windshield wiper. So
Okay.
something along those lines, you know.
No, I asked this because I've got the digital forecast up for Georgia and Atlanta. Now this is through 8 a.m. Sunday. Atlanta gets .01. Okay, so I would think that's your where you put the windshield wipers on, maybe.
All right, then that's your itsy bitsy.
Right, as opposed
that's
to
your itsy bitsy.
Okay.
Yeah, so definitely, if you have .01 stretched out over how long? A 6-hour period, or 12 hours?
No, this is total precip. This is total.
Oh, total precip. So yeah, you most definitely need to have the windshield wiper on intermittent.
Okay.
And you can even change the speed of intermittent, as you well are aware. But I don't know how much itsy bitsy is going to bother you as opposed to teeny weeny.
So now I've got this all set up on the digital forecast just to go on with what you've been doing with the rain, just to look at some specific amounts, and you can see where the big rains are here along and to the right of the track. So I would say look where the 3-inch rainfall amounts are, and anything that is left of to the right of that or to the east of that. So you the track of the system of Kyle, if you want to call it the remnant of Kyle, after landfall. The way they've got it drawn in terms of the rainfall, the core would probably go somewhere west of Charleston. Now, bear in mind with this sort of hybrid look, you're going to get more and more of that rain is going to wind up being more on the west side than on the east side. And then as the system translates, you'll and all that drop moisture that's offshore is getting involved. So kind of makes it a mix of both. But you see solid rainfall amounts of just over or just under a half a foot in eastern parts of South Carolina. You get into North Carolina, and again, this is through Sunday morning. There's other things going on that might argue that there could be more rain into the first part of next week, which we'll get to in a moment. You're seeing 3 to 4 inch rains in North Carolina. You're seeing mostly 2 to 3 inch rains in Virginia, except in Southeast Virginia, where you got a couple of 4-inch prints. And then you move up the coast, and you see Long Island. Generally, there's some numbers here close to 2 inches along the South Shore, less than that on the North Shore. Back around New York City, 0.94. Up in northwest New Jersey in Warren County. I don't know what that spot is in Warren County. It's 0.82. Scranton, roughly at only about a quarter of an inch. And then you see these amounts, Joe, at your house, 55 hundredths being given, 31 hundredths at in Capixie or Poughkeepsie. I kind of like they should have called it Capixie. 4/10 at Hartford. And again, through Sunday morning, barely 6 hundredths in Boston, barely 12 hundredths in Worcester, and 19 hundredths at Springfield. So, again, we're going to add to this, potentially add to these amounts as this whole weather system just sort of evolves into the first part of next week, because the upper air is so very, very complicated. And we're going to take a look at that right now.
And notice the wind barbs coming from the northeast. Not only is it going to be wet, it's going to be cool and damp. I don't think temperatures on Saturday are going to get out of the 50s across the tri-state area. So
I agree.
It's going to be the antithesis. If you remember last Saturday, and last Saturday was so glorious, we had blue sky, brilliant sunshine, low humidity. Here in Putnam County, here in Putnam Valley, Joe, we had our annual Town Day where we all congregated at Town Park and had, all kinds of stuff, hot dogs and different booths with different things to offer to people. And then at night we had fireworks. It was glorious. And now that beautiful weather, the opposite side of that, on the other side of the spectrum, we're now going to make payment on that this coming Saturday because it looks like it's going to be a pretty miserable Saturday, complete with cloud-filled skies, occasional rain, and those chilly, dank, damp temperatures in the 50s. Did I paint a lovely picture
Well,
for
you
you?
did,
Thank you.
and I'm looking at the digital forecast. They brought their numbers down, but probably not down enough. It is probably going to get at least breezy, if not windy, over the say from along the New Jersey shore and point south, because the gradient there's this despite you're going to have this big high that's going to gradually start building down out of Canada. It's going to really tighten up the pressure gradient at times over the weekend and next week. And by the way, you'll notice too in terms of the temperature profile when we get down further south, say in Delmarva, Southeast Virginia, and North Carolina. Look at these temperatures here. We're seeing temperatures in the upper 70s and lower 80s. It's almost like there's this big coastal warm sector here that sets up. We don't have, and this argues against the idea of having an Ida-style rainfall of a foot of rain in 6 hours, because
Right.
you have most of what's going on here is not being done with any kind of a tropical air mass being established. Now, you do run the risk of seeing some bigger rains in all these areas in eastern Virginia, down into North Carolina and into South Carolina, because I mean they're truly in that tropical environment. Even as you go west and north, it's pretty cool in western North Carolina, northwestern South Carolina. We're talking temperatures there too that probably will have a tough time getting out of the 50s. Now, here's a look at how this is working upstairs with regard. I don't know how much of the upper air you got to see, Joe, but I will just say this. If this were if this were the winter time, this was a pattern that snow lovers will love to see, and therefore you would never see this happen in the winter time, just on spite. But I brought it back to Tuesday night. We've had this deep trough in the east. You could see where Ian is, well to the east of the Florida Keys, making its northeast motion toward Port Charlotte. The upper trough to the north swinging around that created enough of a weakness to pull it northeastward rather than taking it north or northwestward. And remember, folks, it was the fact that that turn to the northeast was so critical in keeping Ian in a tropical environment, which allowed it to get to an almost Category 5 hurricane, as opposed to if it had gone straight northwestward up toward the Florida Panhandle. I guarantee you this time around that thing will not have been anywhere close to a Category 5, because it would have pulled in all the dry air that was just sitting there and waiting for something to drag it down. This hurricane was too far south and never got into that close enough to get the dry air involved, and that's why it got as strong. One of the reasons why it got as strong as it did. Crosses Florida, the northern trough begins to pull out, and now you're left with weak upper features in the southeast that kind of get stronger here in this sort of hybrid setup that we have. You see where the upper low is Friday morning to the south of Charleston, and then it moves somewhere between Charleston and Myrtle Beach, lifts up to the northwest into western North Carolina. What does that do? Well, it leaves us further up the eastern seaboard in a southerly flow. Look at that. So remember, folks, you got all that moisture that's sitting out in the ocean. Where does it go? It's going to get pulled up northward, up toward southern New England, and then you'll notice just to the north of there, upstate New York, there you have a westerly flow, and there's your cutoff. Somewhere where that westerly flow begins, that's the northern fringe of where the precip gets, and then you got to deal with this. See, this to me, Joe, is very bizarre. I just wonder if we're going to see some changes here. But you've got this wrapped up upper low Saturday morning sitting in western Virginia, and it just sits there. Even drops southward into western North Carolina on Sunday. Then you got another short wave here that's coming down. We can clean this up for here. You got this other short wave that's coming down. You got this thing is opening up, then all of a sudden that next shortwave comes down and makes another cutoff for Tuesday. And there's some kind of gale center that develops off the mid-Atlantic coast on
I
not
noticed that.
yeah, not
Yeah,
just and not just on the GFS, by the way, but also on the European. I think the European was even more bullish with this, where and suddenly the cutoff low deepens, which means the surface low deepens. Um, this is a very interesting setup. I think it could create some problems here into midweek, not necessarily tropical problems, but you got that big high to the north. This sort of prolonged period of northeast winds. You just wonder whether you could get into some tidal flooding. Here's the surface on the GFS from the today's late day run, taking it inland just near Charleston. It's got it down. It gets it down to 979. I think the NAM got it down to about 971. And you see the core goes up into western North Carolina. The coastal moisture pivots up the coast for Saturday. And one batch looks like it wants to go out, and then another batch comes up uh, during Sunday, whether that's real or not. And then all of a sudden, you got this gale center that forms off the mid-Atlantic coast with this pressure gradient, and then it rides on out to the northeast. And by the way, that is followed by a cold front with a rather cool air mass behind it for the end of next week and next weekend, when we're talking about a nice big high coming down from Canada and some rather cool air that even produces some blue spots of snow in upstate New York and northern Vermont and New Hampshire.
that gale center, that would be more along the lines of something for, let's say, Wednesday, if we can believe it. It's not something that's immediately following up, after.
No, because you're right, because that high is going to try to build down and dry things out a little bit, maybe for a time. I don't know how much clearing you're going to get out of it, but it's going to try to bring some drier air down Monday and Tuesday. And you know what? At the end of the day, if that high is in a certain spot up there, that it could wind up suppressing everything further south, and the low forms somewhere off the North Carolina Virginia coast. And I don't even know if where the remnants of Ian stop and where this new system starts. It's going to be one of those weird things that we're going to attempt to figure out. But just to lend support to this, the European from earlier today is pretty much doing the same kind of thing here. It's actually a bit more north and west than the GFS is, so it would imply that we would be on and off rain Monday, Tuesday into Wednesday. First thing pulls out, and the second thing forms almost right away. So take your pick, Joe. Does the high win out, or does all the energy in the upper atmosphere win out for the first few days of next week?
Oh, I don't know. It seems like the upper level winds are going to be from a southwesterly direction Sunday and on into the beginning of next week. And then they kind of turn into the southeast and bring in moisture beginning Monday. And then, that southerly airflow. I don't really know, Joe. It will be interesting to see what happens with that secondary low for early next week and where it eventually ends up.
By the way, the overall upper air pattern features a trough at 160 degrees west. Okay, and let me mark this for those of you who don't know where 160 degrees west is. I'm going to draw a line, and that's where 160 degrees west. And you get this really deep upper low there. And most times when you have an upper low in that position, you have a ridge in the west, and you have troughing in the eastern part of the United States. So if you're a winter weather lover, you want to hold on to that broad concept of where these troughs and ridges are. And if we look at the European, we continue to see this. The overall pattern seems to want to keep throwing troughs into the eastern United States. I'm going to switch to the 12Z GFS here really quick and take a look at how that, what that did. And you'll see that even here on the GFS, with whatever happens this week with this upper low that's hanging around, another trough comes into the east, and then another trough comes into the east. There's a tropical system in the northwest Caribbean, and yet another trough drops into the east, and on it goes. So it seems like we've gotten ourselves into a rather coolish weather pattern for the start of October. overall. Now, let me just run through the advisories and everything else. We've got we'll check out the recon, see how far along that is. It looks like they just went into the center, but they haven't put a pressure print. So I'm going to check the graph here, and it looks like, Joe, about 985, 986 millibars for the pressure, and the wind. They had one peak wind measurement at about let's say 65 knots, and another one close to 60. So they kind of have it in the ballpark on the advisory. And with respect to the intensity guidance, you can kind of see this brief blip up between now and 2 o'clock tomorrow afternoon, with a few of these models taking it to 70 knots, so 80, that would be 80 miles an hour. And then, of course, after landfall, it's this big collapse all the way down to under tropical storm strength by the time we get to 48 or 60 hours, and that's pretty reasonable. And with all this upper air energy running around, you see where they're clustered here near Charleston or just east of Charleston. They've shifted a little bit further to the east. The blue models here that are the UKXI, the EGRI, are all to the right of the rest of them, and I point those out if only because of the fact that those two have been consistently to the right for the last 4 days, and they've been consistently correct for the last 4 days. So we have the 8 o'clock advisory, 29.7 north, 79.4 west, maximum sustained winds of 75 miles an hour, moving north-northeast at 10. NHC is, let's just want to check to see what kind of pressure they're carrying here. 986 millibars, 75 mile an hour winds, as we said, and a motion. You want to guess, Joe? 020, 030?
Oh, dear. I'll say 020.
030 at 10 miles per hour. So, but you're saying 020. So after the show, I'll give them a call and I'll let them know that you say it's 020, and I'm sure they'll be rushing to change it. Only kidding, as I said earlier. But
by the way, I think it. You said last night about how rapidly it was moving on both the radar and also the satellite picture, and I said I think that thing is going to get to the coast by morning, and I think it did.
It did. It came offshore about 7-8 a.m.
Right.
Yeah.
They had it yesterday coming offshore at around 2 in the afternoon. Yeah. So I said, that looked much too slow. But
sometimes sometimes I feel like they're just slightly behind the curve. And I can't blame them because they've got their hands full. And if things are happening around the time when they're writing advisories or writing discussions, they don't have the time to incorporate any changes, so it comes maybe an hour or two later. I'm sure they try to do everything as quick as possible. I like to give these folks work really, really hard at what they do. Right. And you have to give them. There are people in the public. I don't know if you were aware, Joe, that there are people out in the public that just lead these absolutely perfect lives and never make mistakes. Just they never make mistakes. And part of their reason for living is to make sure they're standing around pointing out other people's imperfections. And that's what we do here on the Joe and Joe Weather Show.
I can empathize what they probably are going through, because back in the 70s and 80s, I worked for a private weather forecasting service, and there was at any one time there were 3 or 4 of us, and we had a big wall where we had clipboards, and we must have had, and this is not an exaggeration, folks, we must have had like 75 or 80 clipboards, and every 6 hours we had to update every single client, every single clipboard on that wall, especially when we had winter storms or possible big nor'easters coming. It was just 3 or 4 of us taking on all of these clipboards and writing down things as fast as possible while making all these phone calls. And every time something ultimately would fall through the cracks, we might have forgotten to call somebody, or we had forgotten to fill something out on the checklist form or thing. So it's possible that, and too, Joe, I mean, like in the aftermath of a big storm, let's say we're in the middle of a big storm or coming out of the storm, and the extended forecast has to be put together for next Tuesday. and you say, the hell with next Tuesday. But what do you want to say? Say fair. Say partly cloudy. I have no time to deal with next Tuesday. I'm still stuck with what we got right now, and that's the way it goes.
Right, they just run the tape. I mean, yeah, there are certain things when you have situations like this, certain things take priority, and the rest of it, just you wait.
Right.
It has to be. It has to be. There's only so many things that you can do, and you're being pulled, and like everybody else, responsibilities have grown in a job, and pay has, in certain instances, maybe not caught up with that. You suddenly have more things to do, and you're not being compensated for it. So, it's tough, but you try to do the best you can. You try to do a good job. So that's why I always try to, these folks, I think it's really important that we give them the benefit of the doubt. Again, there are some people who apparently, are absolutely perfect at what they do, so they demand perfection from everybody else. Um, well, what can I tell you? We're over 100 likes. Thank you very much for those of you who've hit the like button tonight. We have 201 people watching at the moment, which is wonderful. And any of you new, remember, subscribe to my YouTube channel so that you get notified that the Joe and Joe Weather Show is on. And you can come and you can watch it because we're on 5 days a week. We're not saying goodbye, by the way. We still have things to talk about. Monday through Thursday at 7:30. Tomorrow we will be on at 12 noon so that we can cover what's going on with Ian as it moves into South Carolina. And normally we have a Sunday morning show at 11 a.m., but it's a travel day for me, so because I want to get out of Florida and go back to North Georgia, so I can wake up in the morning with temperatures in the 40s. And anyway, normally we have an 11 a.m. show on Sunday, but we're going to take the weekend off, and then we'll be back on Monday at 7:30. So I'm thinking, at least with respect to the next 4 or 5 days, we'll probably see. I would not be at all surprised in that zone that we cover, which is eastern Pennsylvania to southern New England, to see some changes in the forecast. I was thinking maybe there was a chance that the first round of rain would come through Friday night, come in a little faster Friday night and maybe go out for a little while Saturday afternoon, and then perhaps more off and on-ish Saturday night and Sunday. That's sort of the way I was seeing it. And I agree with you. Temperatures probably going to be hard pressed to get out of the 50s. Uh, Thankfully, the core of this is not going to be part of the equation, at least from what we see right now, and that's really important because we don't want Ida-like rains of of a foot of rain in 6 hours. It doesn't look like we're going to have to deal with that from what I'm seeing. I think, Joe, you'll agree with that.
Yes, I would agree. And even if we got the 4 to 6 inches, and even if we called for that, they'd still blame us. They'd blame us not because they would say, "Oh, we no one told us about the 4 to 6 inches," even though we might have said something like we did last year with Ida. It's the infrastructure, and thankfully these 4 to 6 or 6 to 8 inch heavy duty rain events don't happen too often up here in the New York metropolitan area. They happen on occasion, and then the politicians go out and they start screaming and they start saying that it was the weather forecaster's fault, and they scream and they yell, and then what happens? It's forgotten until the next time it happens several years down the road, and then they go after us again.
Well, they have absolutely no credibility whatsoever in my books. I honestly, when they say stuff, to me it's just a bunch of gas bags, doing the obvious. Okay, because I mean, we don't have an advocacy group that will come out and try to cancel someone for attacking weather people. Okay, we're sort of on our own, but I can tell you I don't care. I honestly, I really don't care. I do my job. I do it as best I can every day. I put 100% of myself into what I do in terms of the forecast analysis that I do, both on my free platforms and on my subscription platforms. The show that we do, the other weather videos that I do, I put 100% in. I don't just haphazardly make stuff up. But on a serious note, Joe, one of the things that I kind of noticed the last few days with Ian, and I think I think it's important to the average person. There's a lot of now even more than ever. There's a lot of information weather overload. And I think it leads to a lot of people doing forecast shopping, which you know how much I abhor forecast shopping, particularly because a lot of people that do forecast shopping with me need, they forget to understand that they need a credit card in order for me to respond. But my point is, there is so much of it, and you've got people. I had this conversation I was having this conversation with someone in Fort Myers, and not and it was certainly a positive conversation, but he's getting all this different information from different people, and he's trying. You're trying to make a wise decision with regard to, do I evacuate, don't I evacuate? But unfortunately, there's all this information piling on, and each one of them is maybe a little bit different, or maybe it's not specifically geared for where you are. And it's like, okay, do I leave? Do I stay? What do I do? And I just would advise folks, try to keep, find whoever you think is credible, or go to the Weather Service websites or the Hurricane Center websites, and your local officials, your local government officials, and get information from one place so that you're not, you don't want to waste time, other people's time, in saying, well, you're saying this, but so and so is saying that. That doesn't work for us. So just kind of, I think it is an issue.
Steve LaPointe, thank you very much for hitting Super Chat. And he says, Joe, when you're wrong, it's usually Rayo's fault. By the way, Steve, it's YOU''RE, not YOUR. So there you go.
I'm sure he was, that's the spell check that did that. Now we've got the grammar police on here. Be very, very careful.
Yes.
It's ITS versus it's IT apostrophe S. That's another big one that shows up incorrectly. But unlike Joe, I'm very forgiving when it comes to the grammar stuff, because every once in a while I'll type something and I'll type it correctly. If I'm texting someone, and spell check will change it because it's decided that it means something other than what I meant it to mean. And I'm one of these people that then goes back and changes it because I got to have the correct grammar on it.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Do you have anything else you want to add? Because we're coming up on 8:21, and we're going to Scott Briller, who is our regular here. We lovingly refer to him as the chairman. Is very has been so very supportive of this channel, and we want to say a big hello to his mom, Mother Briller. Hope all you're doing well. He's got the flu. Doesn't have COVID. He definitely not COVID, but he's got the flu, so he's out. So what we're going to do is we're going to just kind of hold that part of the program till Monday, when he's back and he's better, and all the hurricanes and tropical storms are gone for at least a little while. So we will be back doing that on Monday. By the way, Christinapedia, nails on a chalkboard don't bother me, just so you know. It's one of those things. It bothers everybody. I don't understand it. It doesn't bother me. Maybe my ears are not tuned to that pitch. I had Father Poveromo in high school, where I went to high school, and he taught religion. I went to Catholic school, Cardinal Spellman High School in the Bronx. And he had this thing. He would always do this, but he would take a new piece of chalk and purposely bring it down the blackboard to make that screeching sound, and it would bother just about everybody in the class. And I'm like, what's the problem here? I don't get it. It doesn't bother me.
Father Poveromo?
Yes, Father Poveromo, poor man.
Okay.
That was his name, Father Poveromo. Not wonderful guy. Wonderful guy. I think he may be still around if he watches this show. Hi, Father Bob.
Well, he may be around. I don't think Sister Charles Edwards is around anymore, though.
No, Joe, but she is. I'll tell you this. She could be. See that light? I don't know if you could see the light behind me.
Yeah.
That could be her lurking. Just beware, because
At Holy Road.
if I bend my head back just right, notice the halo.
At Holy Rosary, we went to Holy Rosary in the early 60s, and you may remember Sister Ursula, the world's largest
Oh,
nun.
I, I'm trying to remember if she was. I'm thinking she was probably one of those feared nuns.
Oh yeah, well she was very tall and very imposing.
Yes. So
So
every Catholic grammar school of folks of our age had at least one imposing nun who was in golden gloves,
right.
and so and they always had these names that just like when you heard the name, you knew that this was like, don't mess with this woman. So
Right.
so Sister Ursula. So where I went to school in the Bronx at St. Philip and James, which is now no longer there, um, we had this, and I always thought Sister Germaine. Okay, Sister Germaine. Now when you have a nun whose name is Germaine, all right. I mean, she was. I listen. When I went to school in grammar school, so we're talking mid 60s to early 70s, right? She was 80 years old then. If there was a bet if there were betting odds of there were betting odds on whether she were still alive or not, I would bet that she's still alive. Okay? And we'll just leave it at that. So anyway, that was a nice.
Renata, who never went to Catholic school, and I would tell her these stories, and I would tell those stories about Sister Charles Edwards, and she never would believe me. She said, "You're exaggerating. It couldn't possibly be as bad as what you say." And I contacted my friend Andrew Maniglia, who went to St. Benedict's in the Bronx, which is where Sister Charles Edwards was based. And I said, Renata doesn't believe. And he sent her an email and says, Joe speaks the truth. Thank you, William Hubert, for hitting super chats. And to you, Joe, he says, safe trip back home. What exactly are you going to? I mean, we were looking I was watching all day long, the roadways broken up all over, it seems like Florida. What exactly or how exactly are you going to go home? What interstate are you planning to
No,
take to get back to Georgia?
well, first of all, I'm up in Fort Pierce, so I'm actually not that far from Cape Canaveral. I can see them when they launch rockets from here.
Yeah,
Okay,
right.
so I'm on the East Coast. 95 is fine. All right, the Florida Turnpike is fine. So for me, I get on the Florida Turnpike, I take it up, and it ends at Route 70 at 75 well north of Tampa. So I take the Florida Turnpike, and then I get on 75, and once I get on 75, it's a straight shoot all the way to almost all the way to Northeast Georgia. So
All right.
I have absolute. In fact, when I came down here, so because I came down on Sunday, um, there was actually a fair amount of traffic, people, I guess, coming out of the Tampa area and going north on the northbound side, but I had absolutely no problem coming in. I drove today from Boynton Beach, which is south of West Palm Beach and
Right.
north of Fort Lauderdale. So I drove the 70 miles from there back here to Fort Pierce on 95. There was nothing on either direction, not a problem. Roads were fine, they're in great shape, no issues. Again, I'm on the East Coast, so that which explains a lot. Okay.
Renata, all through the course of the last couple of days, does Joe know when he's going to be able to go? Does he know which road he's going to take? I'm concerned about how he's going to be able to get home. So she cares about you, Joe.
Oh, I
Sometimes I think she cares. Sometimes I think she cares about you more than she does me. But that's
I appreciate no, I appreciate that. No, there's really absolutely no problem. And when I get into Georgia, I know my gas station stops. So the last gas station on the Florida Turnpike, if the prices are the same as they were coming down, so I will pay 3.40 a gallon to top. Um, to top my tank off. And then my next gas station stop is exit 144 in Georgia, where I stop at Buc-ee's. Okay. And the price of gas at Buc-ee's, Joe, $2 when I was coming down, $2.66 a gallon. 2.66. So that's my second fill up, and then I'll stop at my daughter's and I'll do a third fill up there, and I'll pay probably maybe 310. And then when I get up back in Northeast Georgia at the very end, I'll top my tank off at about 289. So.
All right, we better cut this short before I start to cry. So we'll see you all tomorrow at 12 noon, high noon tomorrow, which should be just about the time that good old Ian is going to be making yet another hit, probably this time somewhere along the South Carolina coast. Nighty-night, Joe.
Yes, and thanks for the super chat hit, Bill Uber, William Uber, hitting a super chat tonight. Thank you so much. He says, safe trip back home. Thank you very much, Bill. I will definitely make sure I have a safe trip back home. Thanks to Steve LaPointe from earlier. Thanks to those of you who took our likes up to 142. We're gonna sign off. So before we sign off, get to 150. We have a low life on the chat board right now, who is putting up messages about adult dating sites. We're all celibate here. Chat 69XYZ. Okay, we're all celibate. We're here talking about weather, so we could care less about sex. Although that's why we're here. This is our sex. Okay. Good night, Joe.
Wait a minute. Very, very quick story. We're on today. On one of my total eclipses of the sun that I had observed from an aircraft over the Faroe Islands, and it was filled with German people. In fact, there were two planes. They couldn't fit me on the one with the Americans. They said, "Would you mind you go on the flight with the Germans?" I said, "No problem, as long as I got a view of the sun." Went on there, saw the eclipse. After the eclipse was over, I noticed coming up the aisle of the plane, there was a very attractive young lady. She was holding a microphone. She had a guy trailing her with a camera. She was from Deutsche Welle. Deutsche Welle is the national television service of Germany. And she was interviewing people on the plane and asking them what they thought about the eclipse. And they were all talking in German. He gets up to where I am. I was on the back of the plane, and she asked, and I said, "I'm sorry, I don't speak German. I'm married to somebody who's German, but I don't speak German." And she looked at me and says, "Oh, do not worry. I also speak English as well as German. And what I will do is I will ask you the question that I've been asking all the others in German, and you answer in English, and I will translate for my viewers." And I said, "Fine." So she asked me in German, what did I think about the eclipse of the sun? And I looked straight into the camera, and I said, "It was better than sex." And I thought the woman was going to drop her microphone.
Do you remember what the translation for that sounded like?
I don't know. I don't. Oh, but
you should have wrote it down for future reference.
For future reference.
Exactly. All right, everybody. And some of you have put up some very funny lines. Thank you. I do appreciate it. Yes, Jason Schaefer, you waited for the best part of the show. And then Oscar said, it's not just hurricanes, which are wet. And then you are correct. So we've all gotten sophomoric now. So we will, that's a $10 word. We'll see you tomorrow at 12 noon. Good night, everybody.
Night.